Could you please welcome to stage our second speaker, Jamie Pride? So
Good morning. Good morning. Great to be here. I want to start by talking about something probably a little bit mundane, but hopefully everybody here has done it at least once or twice, and that's vacuuming. I know it's not the most sexiest topic in the world, but if I asked you to name a company that was synonymous with amazing design in vacuuming, one company comes to mind, right? Yeah, absolutely right. Dyson. And everybody in this room hopefully knows Dyson's value proposition, right? Because Dyson's and their vacuums suck better than anybody else's vacuum, right? This is a vacuum cleaner that does not lose suction. I own one. I don't use it that often, but it's an amazing piece of iconic design. But it's only incremental innovation. Ultimately, this is just a slightly better vacuum cleaner. It's a great vacuum cleaner, but it's just incrementally better. It's not very disruptive. I don't want to talk about Dyson. I want to talk about a company that you've probably never heard of, a company called iRobot, that a couple of years ago decided they were going to make a vacuum cleaner. Now, the surprising thing about that is that they were in the business of building minesweepers. And they were a defence contractor, but they said, you know what, to hell with it, we're going to build a vacuum cleaner. And the vacuum cleaner that they built is this. It's called the Roomba. For those of you who haven't seen it, it's a circular robotic vacuum cleaner that sits in the corner of your room and vacuums when you're not there, which is fantastic. Now, the interesting thing about this story is that iRobot and Roomba, they view the problem of vacuuming differently. They view the problem of vacuuming through the lens of time. And I think it's a really interesting case study because you can see two companies that come from very different heritages. A company like iRobot that comes from military applications that can completely shift state and innovate equally well as a company like Dyson, but they can view the same problem through two very different lenses, one through time and one through suction. And I think that's a really powerful skill to have. And to understand how to harness that skill, we need to have a look at how business thinking has substantially changed over the past 80 to 100 years. Because I would be almost certain that every single company in this room, whether you're big, whether you're small, whether you're old, or whether you're new, you have all started in the same way. Most businesses start up with some kind of iconic entrepreneurial founder or founders. In the case of Dyson, it's Dyson. Could be Anita Roddick at the Body Shop. It could be, you know, the most famous couple, obviously Jobs and Woz, or the new ones, somebody like Larry and Sergey, who founded Google. All of these entrepreneurs, they share a stereotype, right? We know what the kind of iconic entrepreneur is. You know, they're sitting in a garage, scratching an itch, looking to change the world, you know, looking to explore. Because entrepreneurialism is predominantly around exploration. And the interesting thing about exploration is there's usually no map. And a lot of times there's no compass. And so in most startups, there is a dominant thinking style. And that thinking style is intuition. Some people call it gut. But most of these founders just kind of had a sense of what they wanted to do and how they wanted to disrupt markets. And that's because startups are predominantly fluid. They are businesses that deal with high levels of ambiguity. They're constantly experimenting. They're looking at problems in very, very different ways. And because of that, they have to rely on their gut. They are very comfortable working with other humans in garages, eating ramen noodles, you know, trying to solve the world's problems. But eventually they grow up. Eventually they have to make money. I've invested in plenty of startups and most of them don't make money. But a lot of them do. But they do that by growing up. And sometimes they change leaders. Great example of this is Ray Kroc at McDonald's. Now, Ray Kroc didn't invent the hamburger, and he absolutely didn't start McDonald's. But he saw what the founders of that business did, and he said, you know what? We could make hamburgers nationally. We could do it globally. We've got to kind of get a little bit better at consistency, at scalability, repeatability. All of these things need to lead to profitability. And that's not a bad thing. Businesses are here to make money. Look at somebody like Tim Cook at Apple. Very, very different leader from Steve Jobs, right? But no less responsible for the success of Apple as Jobs. For those of you who don't know, he was the COO of Apple before he was the CEO. And he is responsible for the fact that Apple have an amazing, amazing manufacturing and supply chain capability. They make more devices and can ship them over the world more cheaply than anybody else. It's absolutely essential for their DNA and their company. But a very, very different leader, focused on very, very different things. You look at somebody like Marissa Mayer at Yahoo, coming over from Google. It's a company that's lost its way, needing to grow up a little bit, stripping away the noise and getting to the core of the business. And that's because as businesses make this shift out of startup into the established, they're much more focused around exploitation rather than exploration. So they make that shift out of the kind of creative, and they go, do you know what, it's time to get process driven. It's time to focus a little bit more on technology and a little bit less on people. And that's perfectly okay. But what is alarming is that there's a dominance of critical thinking in established businesses today. What changed is that 80 to 100 years ago, we became less comfortable with intuition and more comfortable with data and analytics. With the advent of the MBA and with management consultants, and I was one of them, rolling through businesses, we have a mantra that basically says if it can't be measured, it can't be done. And that's risky because businesses start to kind of get solid. They lose their creative edge. They lose their agility. And if you went out to any kind of MBA and said, look, draw me a model for value creation, it looks something like this, which is businesses start out in a fluid state, they focus very much on exploration, and they make a commercial shift, either because their shareholders or because their staff even said, you know what, we need a little bit more structure, we need to be a little bit more solid. The danger in this shift is that it's usually a one-way trip. Businesses start fluid, they move solid, and they stay there. And because of that, they're very, very susceptible to this, which is disruption. And almost no business, there are no businesses in the world that are not touched by disruption today. Whether it be the telecommunications industry, the retail industry, the fashion industry, hey, the hotel industry. If you called a taxi here today, just look at Uber. The taxi industry is being touched by disruption. Every single industry is being touched by disruption in some way, shape or form, whether it be disruptive technology, whether it be disruptive business models, whether it be disruptive innovation. For some, that disruption is terminal. Just ask Borders Books how they feel about disruption. The real thing that's underpinning this is that there's been a huge change of rules. The rules have fundamentally changed, and the danger in that rule change is that the things that once made established companies successful, their size, their scale, their resources, hordes of people, it was an arms race, right? Big was better. It's no longer true. This is asymmetric warfare now. Fast and agile, more nimble, are out competing dominant businesses time and time and time again. I don't think it's all bad news. I don't think you have to choose between one or the other, that startups are fantastic and that established business is outdated. I actually think it's about being ambidextrous. I think it's about bringing both of those concepts together. We should be comfortable bringing critical thinking and intuitive thinking together at the same time. Because if you're going to deal with disruption, you need to be willing to disrupt yourself. You can't be wedded to your old business models anymore. Just ask the recording industry, who hung on to their business model almost to the end. But you also can't be wedded to the way you solve problems. It's not always about bringing in management consultants and MBAs to crunch their numbers. You need to be able to solve problems differently in order to deal with highly disruptive environments. And let's look at that in practice. Let's take a very well-run, solid-state company, somebody like Kimberly-Clark. A couple of years ago, Kimberly-Clark were getting absolutely slaughtered in the market by their nearest competitor, Procter & Gamble, in nappies. They were number 2, number 3. They did everything that a traditional, well-run business would do. Wheel in the MBAs, wheel in the management consultants. Let's do the 5 Ps, product, price, place, promotion. Can never say that properly anyway. Ultimately, they decided they still weren't winning. They were number 2 and number 3 in those categories in their markets, and they decided to take a risk. They went out to the Stanford Design School, and they got some design thinkers to come into their business. And the Stanford researchers came in to Kimberly-Clark, and they saw what you would expect to see in a very well-run business. They saw great product research. This is an anatomically correct. This is like a Baby Alive on steroids. It wheezes and poops at appropriate volumes. They saw great customer research, more photos of babies' bottoms than Facebook, I can tell you. But they just needed to look at the back of the nappy packet to understand how they framed the problem. Because the back of the nappy packet looked like this. I call it the NASA diagram. Because there was an absorption war, right? I mean, if you're in the business of nappies, as a father of three, I can tell you, if you're in the business of nappies, absorption is a primary requirement for nappies. For those of you with parents with children, you will know that. But we had the absorption wars, right? I mean, I had front absorption zones, baby, boy nappies, girl nappies, you know, all of those things. But that wasn't really driving consumer uptake. But it's because they viewed the problem through the lens of absorption, just like Dyson view the problem of vacuuming through the lens of suction. It's not very disruptive at all. So the Stanford researchers, they went and they conducted what's called an ethnographic interview, which is just a fancy word for saying they observed customers. They went out and they spoke to customers. They observed them, they videoed them, they got them to tell them stories. They watched the babies using the product. Don't know how you watch a baby using a nappy, but it must be an interesting piece of research. But in the course of one of those interviews, they were speaking to a couple and they were just about to turn off the camera. And the mother said, look, I just want to tell you this story. Sometimes I go to the park with my daughter. She's 2, she's toilet training, she's still in nappies. My friend Sarah, she brings her son. He's 2, he's not in nappies, he's toilet trained. And when I see them playing together, it makes me feel like a bad mother. Whoa, that's a very, very strong sentiment for what is ultimately just a waste receptacle concept, right? But it led to a huge amount of insight that your child not being toilet trained made you feel like a bad mother. Wow, that's a very emotionally charged statement, but a very, very powerful one. And the researchers went out and spoke to other companies that marketed products to children, like Nike with their little tiny runners. And they worked out at this age, nappies are sort of an item of clothing, and clothing's about identity, and identity's about feeling and emotion. They went out and they spoke to the people who make the product, and they said, look, it's really noisy. Can you make it quiet? And they said, we make it noisy so parents can find their children. And they said, they're not cats with bells. They said, can you sew the sides up? And they said, yes, we can do that. And the rest is history. Because with that one insight, they invented the pull-up, which is a training nappy. This is a $2 billion product category annually for that company. Absolutely commercially successful and launched them into the leading position. All because they had the foresight to be able to shift state. All because they took the risk and went back to their fluid origins. Literally, as well as metaphorically. But they went back to their fluid origins and developed an amazing product. And when you bring these things together, when you bring the critical thinking concepts together with the intuitive thinking concepts, that's called design thinking. And I think design thinking is more of a toolbox than a process. Some people call it human-centered design or human-centered innovation. The interesting word there is human, because we have been taught at a very early business age to take humanity and emotion out of business. But human-centered design or design thinking is very much about empathy. And I don't know, I mean, at my MBA, I couldn't find any courses on empathy at Macquarie when I studied there. So people struggle with the word. We struggle with emotion and feelings in business, but businesses are full of humans. And humans experience the world through a very emotional lens. And so for us to connect with our customers, for us to connect with our staff, we need to master an ability to create and drive empathetic views with our stakeholders. And it's not as hard as it seems. It's really about observation. The challenge with observation is our own inbuilt biases. Sometimes the noise of our expertise deafens us to those insights. And so managing observation structurally and as a process is really, really important. And I'll give you 3 tips for observing your customers. The first one is looking for contradictions. If I asked everybody in this room whether you wash your hands after you go to the toilet, 100% of you would tell me that you do. Statistics would tell me that you're lying. There's a percentage of you, you know who you are, who do not wash your hands after you go to the toilet. However, The lie, the contradiction, is really, really interesting. When you find situations where your customers' actions do not match their words, that's an area where you want to explore. It's an area you want to drill into. That's where the insight lies. That's where disruption lies, in that mismatch. My favourite is this one. My favourite are workarounds. Humans are amazing at short-circuiting anything, pretty much. You just need to go to your local park and you will see a concrete footpath around it, I guarantee you, and you will see a path that cuts the corner off every single time. I don't know why they don't put the concrete path there. But understanding workarounds, again, is another way to observe and to derive insight. And then lastly, about stories. I can guarantee you in the next 2 days you will forget almost everything that I tell you in the course of this presentation, except for the 2 stories that I told. The story about Dyson and Roomba and the story about Kimberly-Clark. Because we are hardwired as humans to remember stories. Stories allow us to communicate a huge amount of subtlety and complexity quickly. They also imprint an emotional response on us. And getting your customers to tell you stories and telling them stories and using storytelling as a mechanism for driving disruptive innovation and product innovation in your organizations is an absolutely powerful tool. So I'll leave you with a story. Let's call this guy Fred, and he decided to send his wedding invitations out by email. What's wrong with that? Oh, doesn't seem pretty normal to me. If you go and speak to a designer, they will tell you about use and usability. Use and usability, email, wedding invitations, use, usability, works pretty good, right? The use is, I need to send a wedding invitation. Usability, who's it going to? What date, time, where is it? Fantastic. As a matter of fact, it's more instant. They can reply online. Hands up anybody who's sent wedding invitations out by email. Dangerous question. There's always 1 or 2 techies in the room. Nobody, or very few people, send their wedding invitations out by email because it's not about use and usability. It's about meaning. Wedding invitations represent so much meaning to us. They represent how we want to be perceived by our friends and family, how wealthy we are, how stylish we are, a whole host of things. And companies that can ladder up use, usability, but more importantly, meaning, derived from empathy, derived from a fluid state, intuitive-based thinking, those companies will be the disruptors. Those companies will forge unbelievably strong emotional bonds with their customers that are unbelievably difficult to compete with. Why do crazies line up for 6 days to buy a phone? I love the phone. I'm not lining up for 6 days. But that company, and we all know who I'm talking about, that company is unbelievably great at understanding the power of that emotional connection and understanding that that creates amazing, amazing bonds with its customers. I think that Maya Angelou put it best when she said that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. I was rehearsing this presentation this morning. My 14-year-old daughter said to me, "Dad, it's good, a little bit long." Always tough. She goes, "Can you just give me it in 140 characters?" So I did. For me, businesses need to be able to shift state in order to thrive in disruptive times. Customer empathy and experience wins hands down every time. Thank you very much.